proud of himself and his efforts. Nothing foreshadowed trouble. The game obediently highlighted a selection window asking if the player wanted to enter the room, to which the guy immediately agreed, but immediately a second window flashed warning that there would be no turning back after entering the chief's office. The guy did not pay attention to the game commentary and began to impatiently wait for the room to load. The load of the last challenge began, and the player continued to wait in his thoughts about everything related to the game. The main character realized that in all these 9 years he had never arrived at the boss, and this would be his first and last time. He started thinking about tactics against the boss, and his confidence that he could beat the boss outright increased as a window flashed on the computer screen with a inscription that the training had been completed and everything that had been before was just the beginning. The guy was nobly surprised by this twist, as I believed it was a real game. When the language of the game itself changed to Korean, the player began to realize that the game had traps that weren't written anywhere, and he went crazy because of that. Jack started to feel irritated, realizing the fact that he had spent every year of his life in training could have gone even faster if he had received the Korean version of the game. Suddenly a bright blue light began to emanate from the computer, filling his entire room. Soon the light began to shine, absorb Jack himself, dissolving in the air and leaving no trace of the guy. Eventually disappeared, and the light returned to the computer screen, leaving the room without an owner. When the guy woke up, noticed that he was among a large number of barbarians in some dark cave. The oldest of the barbarians was the older man, who started shouting his speech to the audience. Jack was still trying to figure out where I was wondering why this had happened in the first place, and what was happening now. The more I looked to the barbarians around him, the more he realized that he didn't belong here. The main character's gaze fell on the arm that had changed after arriving here. That is, it became more muscular and was covered in strange tattoos, and only then did Jack realize that his body had changed and he had become a true barbarian among others, which was not a good omen. The protagonist felt confused when he realized that for a short time, he had only acted as a barbarian, and that wasn't him. The boy was taken out of his thoughts by the voice of the old man, who began to shout the names of the barbarians one by one. The first barbarian. He confidently approached the old man and stood examining the weapons rack in front of him. The man went to the counter, took a double-sided axe, and held it, showing his choice to everyone around him. The old man continued to shout the names of other people one by one, and each of these people started to approach him to choose their weapons. The guy gathered all the puzzles and realized that this meeting was an initiation ceremony for barbarians. All brave men who went up to choose their weapons and then raised them for display were initiated into true warriors. After the soldier's initiation, the elder barbarian shouted that the blessing of a certain Rafoni would come with them. It was at that moment that he covered his family with astonishment, because it awakened in him what the main character got into. For some reason, Jack was trapped in a game that he had been trying to complete for all these years without understanding how to get back. Jack was scared when he realized the gravity of the situation in which he seemed to be. Saw he wasn't the only one. He was brought out of his thoughts by the voice of an equally shocked player in the body of a barbarian who was next to him, and wondered what that place was and how he ended up here. The protagonist tried to find answers based on everything he knew about this game, while the second player was very nervous and bit his nails trying to calm down. But they didn't have to think much, because suddenly the old man appeared in front of them and asked who dared to speak in the ceremony. Looking at Jack first, he quickly responded negatively and gave the second player a disapproving look, since because of him they were noticed, and it was definitely not good. With an angry expression on his face, the elder looked at the barbarian, nervous, saying that he was the one who gave the voice, and the situation continued to heat up. Redhead tried to get out of the situation by asking if that place was part of the elderly man's game with a trembling voice. Old Man considered a conversation with the axe the best answer, so without more delay, and with a slight movement of the hand, he cut off Redhead's head. He didn't giving him a chance of survival. Part of the blood covered the surprised and frightened Jack, who was standing with a dead body head that had only recently become. I had many questions, and tried to find answers. The body fell to the ground, and the old man looked at Jack with the same look Severus studied him from head to toe, as he clasped his hands behind him, trying to keep all the terror to himself so he wouldn't face death. The barbarian didn't give anything, so the old man calmed down a little, and said that one of the warriors had been captured by the evil spirit, and all should forget the questions the spirit evil was doing. The old man put the axe back behind his back, and began to return to the dais to continue the ceremony, leaving Jack alone with his thoughts and new information about this world. After a quick information, the protagonist made 3 conclusions about the place he was stop, and now realize even better that here the players are called evil spirits and exterminated. Then he couldn't let them catch him, as the other barbarians pulled the headless body aside during the ceremony continued, and the old man began to call out the names of the other warriors for initiation. The hero realized he didn't know his name here because there was no indication of what his name was, and if he was called and didn't fit in, he would wake up more suspicions, but not instant death. The main character decided he would look around to see if anyone was leaving, and if 2 seconds passed and no one took a step, he would be able to go out to the elder himself. There was the moment when the elder shouted Bian's name and began to wait for the owner of the name came out of the crowd. Barbara. Silence reigned in the crowd of newly minted warriors because none of the barbarians had taken a single step closer to the old man in the last few seconds. Decided to risk Jack. He began to leave the crowd, remembering his new name by which he would always be called. So the hero stood in front of the old man, still tense because of the whole situation, and the two exchanged quickly suspicious looks, but the situation was quickly alleviated when the old man put aside his suspicions and with a smile on his face offered the warrior to choose a weapon that would accompany him on his journey. The character principal approached the weapons rack and began comparing the weapon's desirability based on his 9 years of experience in games. Soon he chose his weapon and raised it, showing the whole crowd a shield instead of a hammer or an axe, with the acceptance of which he took his new name. The hall of main character was left empty without an owner, and just the screen computer displays information about BARBARIAN, and with a notification that all these information about the game character will be sent to the administrator. Main character tells us how at the beginning of his game he tried to choose and give the barbarian 2-handed swords, a double-sided axe, and a hammer for battles, but no matter what he tried, the character died a lot quickly and very frequently, which practically exhausted Jack, and he began to look for alternatives that would be useful to him. Even taking into account the greatest survivability of all characters, was impossible to make normal progress due to death frequent of the barbarian. And one day, going through the hacks with weapons, the main character looked at other options of equipment, i.e. shields. The idea came up for him to try the shield too, because in fact it was not written anywhere that a barbarian should take a sword or hammer to the battle, and he just needed to increase the survival time. As it turned out, choice was not in vain, because soon the shield paid for itself, and Jack was able to make a lot of progress in the game, defeating stronger opponents in a short time. After the consecration of all majorities, BARBARIAN no longer had time to think, as the bridge to the gate in front of them began to descend, allowing the barbarians to pass through to the city of Raphia, where his purpose was. Bjorn knew exactly for where they were going, so he was starting to get nervous because they were going downtown to reach the labyrinth. The bridge finally fell. The elder blessed his clan for the journey, and the entire multitude of barbarians ready to fight against everything and everyone ran forward, lifting clouds of dust under their feet, and behind them BARBARIAN also ran in the first. Standing in line trying not to get trampled by your brothers, still trying to decide what to do next, and what to do to make the road through Raffia as smooth as possible. Everyone ran after their leader, who was in front, and the main character decided to follow them, since he didn't want to attract unnecessary attention, even though he didn't trust how the barbarians knew the city as. If you saw the distrust, it was not in vain, because the first leader of the barbarians led them to a dead end instead of take them to the city center. The crowd started shouting at the disgruntled leader, until BARBARIAN began to understand the stupidity of the barbarian race and the gravity out of his problem. A barbarian named Einar decided to take over as chief temporary worker, who seemed quite confident in his ability to lead the people through the streets of the city. That also accepted very quickly. Even BARBARIAN took note of his trust in himself, thought in her that she would find her way to the city center as quickly as possible, but even she managed to find the right path and failed the task, and the crowd continued to discuss who would be the next born. Realized that nothing good would come of it, and if nothing was done, they wouldn't reach the city center, much less take a certain time. But the guy wasn't going to risk his secret either, so he approached the very depressed Einar, wanting to give her a tip on how to find the way. He asked her to be silent, and silently told the girl about her plan, giving her a chance to peek her guilt before her relatives and lead them. He advised them to follow a group of other races that know exactly how to get to the maze, and are also going there. It is worth noting that here we are introduced to how the races treat each other, because the entire company of strangers proved arrogant and wouldn't even perceive the barbarians as the same intelligent people, openly mocking them as if ignoring their open mockery. Einar quickly agreed to BARBARIAN's proposal with fire in my eyes, happy to have received a second chance. It was time to act and take the entire horde to the city center. So without fear of condemnation, Einar ran to the company to lead them again, and to the surprise of the protagonist, no one was against them. They just glorified Einar as they did. The first time, this hole in purple space turned out to be a passage to the labyrinth, or to a world inhabited by a variety of monsters that these volunteers have to defeat to get money. The closer the moment to close the maze, since it opens once a month for 10 minutes. BARBARIAN was more scared, since had never fought monsters with his bare hands before. He realized that even in his real world, everything he did was in the hospital under observation for most of his life due to illness, and fighting someone was out of the question. But the main character had no other choice, and not only for him, but also for the rest of the barbarians who became adults, since everyone had to pay Raffia taxes. This mechanic was also introduced into the game, and was a mandatory part of the life of any living creature that had 20 years of age in this world, and trying to escape the tax was punishable by the guillotine. In total, there are 2 different ways in this game to earn money to pay tax, either by fighting or for the more common part-time work with humans that is not available to barbarians, as they have been treated with disdain all the time due to his immense strength and stupid nature. BARBARIAN, he knew there was no other option but to fight, so he tried to convince himself to enter the maze as quickly as possible before the passage closed, and he had to wait a month for the passage to reopen. Over time, passage started to decrease. There were only 5 minutes left to close, the only opportunity for the barbarian to survive. BARBARIAN tried to muster his resolve and finally go through the portal to entering the monster's lair. The problem was that even with the body of a warrior, he couldn't overcome the fear of death coming from his real brain, so even the first step was very difficult for him. So the character principal would have sunk into despair and signed his death warrant if he hadn't had been taken by a woman's voice, and a hand on his shoulder ended up being Einar, who noticed how much BARBARIAN he thought it had become a problem for himself. The girl noticed the boy's confusion, so she decided to come up to him to help him and take him upstairs, since now the portal is going to close and they will be here for a month without any means of living. Having gained a little courage, Bien told his friend to go ahead first, and he immediately followed, which she quickly agreed before entering the portal that leads to the labyrinth. And Har turned and looked at him with a confident smile on his face, thanking you for your recent help in find his way to the city center. This thanks and praise from anyone was the first he received while he was in the game world, and it not only surprised him, but also added some confidence to him. Respected his wisdom, and wanted to become the same. Then, with his hands at his side, she asked Born if there was any way to become intelligent, intrigued by his answer before exposing himself with an honest answer. Thought about it, and said that you need to learn to think before doing anything. The answer was accepted by Einar with the same radiant smile. She said if they could both survive to the labyrinth she defined, I would definitely come up with something to repay him for his advice. Einar's words made the guy lose his patience, because he didn't expect such a decisive and calm about death, and forgot that such insane determination was always inherent in true barbarians. Wanting to investigate the girl's answer, Bjorn suddenly asked with a serious expression on his face if Einar was afraid of death. The girl did not expect such a question and hesitated a little with the answer, after which she responded with the question if it's strange to feel afraid of the inevitable. Then her smile returned to its face, and she explained that even though she was scared, she had no other choice. So she wasn't even going to retreat. She was well aware that death awaited her anyway, but she wasn't going to sit idly by, so she chooses to enter the maze, where there is a chance to earn extra money from the monthly tax and survive. Bjorn, I like this determination, although realized that it was only because the barbarians had no other way to earn some extra money that they learned from an early age to overcome fear of it and go to their deaths filled with a sense of courage. The protagonist jumps into the portal at the last moment, ready to yell against monsters and survive, but if there was one thing he wasn't prepared for, it was the complete darkness of the first level of the maze that should contain crystals to light up the cave, where he found himself. Remembering the game, the main character says it wasn't usually dark at first walk because of the same crystals, so not even a torch was needed to travel through the level. But it seems that for some reason, instead of going to the start of the level, our barbarian was thrown in the dark zone, i.e. a place on the first level where there was not a single crystal to light up the territory. With no one around, Born had one hand free and was trying to summon the game window, inventory, statistics menu, or action windows, saying their names out loud to try to make survival easier, but nothing worked, and that's why the barbarian silently went crazy, realizing that the game was of no help here. So he was left with just food and a shield in his hands, and if he was defeated there would be no fresh start. Staying where it was not a good option because of the monsters that roam the first level. Then the guy started moving forward in search of companions and food, but after just a few steps he himself did not notice how he fell into the goblin's trap and screamed in pain in his right leg, falling to his knees in front of the trap. After a moment of fright, Born quickly gathered himself and covered his leg with his shield, giving himself time to calm down and pull his leg out. Before the local goblins gathered in their screams, Bjorn looked up at the attempt to think of a plan of action, as he had already heard a rustling not far from him. As it turned out, the goblins are monsters from the first level of the maze that are small, green, long-eared creatures that love to set traps for warriors and then wait in the dark until the victim weakens and dies. Is exactly how the main character knows, so it was necessary to act quickly, and he began to silently take the injured leg out of the trap simultaneously, noticing that there was poison in the trap, which only worsened the situation. The protagonist, he stood up, holding his shield in front of him as a precaution, and began to think about the option of escaping when his leg rightness with which he entered the trap. The player's osity became Phil and Bjorn created an action plan according to which he decided to move forward. As if he didn't realize, the goblin was somewhere nearby along the way. Bjorn, like a true barbarian, began insulting the goblin and his entire family, starting with his mother, ending with him, reminding him that they were goblins and not other monsters. The pain began to lessen little by little due to the effect of the poison, which had a bad effect on the barbarian's condition, almost causing him to fall unconscious. But now, after some time mocking the duende, he finally appeared behind Bjorn, apparently wanting to make Bjorn swallow his words. The sounds of footsteps echoed through the huge cave they were in, and the protagonist quickly looked back, ready to defend himself, but the darkness was complete. The elf showed no signs of presence, hiding from the barbarian's eyes and waiting for the right moment to attack. Then the guy tried to escape the monster, accelerating with all his strength and up to where his injured and numb leg allowed, but as soon as the player stopped, the elf did the same, and when he had to, running followed him, not allowing the distance to increase or decrease. Bjorn, he started to get exhausted and realized that it wasn't a chase, but rather a game of cat-mouse where the guy was himself Mouse that started to get angry, but the goblin was only happy about it, wanting to continue the game and see the victim faint from exhaustion, exhausted and scared to death, while Anto was nearby smiling. Bjorn gave up the path to find the goblin and turned around, trying to leave now, because there was neither strength nor opportunity to fight. But the wounded warrior did not pass for a long time, after which he fell on the ground like a stone, trying to imitate the dead. That was his plan. He was interested in this turn of events and continued to watch the barbarian's corpse with intrigue, feeling some kind of prank on this whole situation. To test his thoughts, he threw a stone on the head of Bien, who was still alive, which angered him a little while. He tried to pretend to be dead, but the plan was successful, and Bjn was able to deceive the goblin, and he began to silently approach Bien's body, with the intention of robbing the player before the goblin could touch his shoulder. Or the boy quickly turned around and caught the goblin by surprise without sparing any effort. He shot towards the goblin, who managed to jump away from the barbarian, but before completely losing hope, the body was controlled and hit for the second time. This time everything went well, and the guy grabbed the goblin by the throat, throwing him into a nearby wall and continuing to ed him for another time, using all the strength given to him. And here was the last blow, by which the guy crossed his arms and hit the goblin's head with all his strength, and with some tension he was able to finish off the annoying goblin, and he could have lay there completely beaten, except for a moment. The duende's body began to disappear, turning into clouds of brilliance and light as Bjorn leaned over to see if there was anything left of him. Instead of a body, a small lone scarlet crystal was left on the ground, which is another type of currency in the city of Raphia. The guy picked up the stone and he sighed a lot because he had spent so much time and effort on just one stone. Bien put his hand on the wall, leaning on it, and stood up because it was time to continue his path. In this world there are many different types of monsters that inhabit the maze world. The next one is stronger than the next one previous, and each of them disappears after death, leaving behind some scarlet things and crystals. And outside the labyrinth is the great rich city of Raphia, where all races live together and in safety. But even though this is the whole game world, he will never again be able to perceive his reality. Just as a game, a lot of time has passed, and Bjorn was still trying to find a way out of the dark zone, this time on the ground, which was an advantage since the injured leg did not need to be used again. But in the same way, thanks to small steps, the guy managed to dodge the traps. Immediately noticing the character, Maine felt damp sweat began to fall from his forehead, but he continued to crawl in the hope of finding help. The road was long. He was losing more and more blood. Found no one on the way, and the barbarian had no more hope when everything began to double. Even the Main character almost dead, was just a few steps from the exit. This gave strength to Bjorn, and he continued to crawl towards the source of the light in hopes of finding someone to help him heal his leg before he died. But these thoughts are opposed by their realistic alter ego, or one of their personalities that was aware of all the burdens of life, as a barbarian who wasn't exactly at ease. He tries to convince the main character to turn himself in, since he is neither an intelligent man nor a girl beautiful to be saved, which means he won't wait for help from people in such a situation. But Bien will not be discouraged when the exit is so close to him, and continue to crawl forward despite all the gravity of his well-being. In the end, luck was on his side, and he met his first group of adventurers, or rather people of different races, who explore the world of Labyrinth in the same way he did. One of the adventurers drew attention to the dying barbarian and reported the who saw the leader. The squadron leader crouched down next to the post, thinking that it was suspected that the newcomer was also a barbarian who had arrived at this place before the experts, who visited the labyrinth not for the first time. But this alignment only plays into your hands as you can get information of a newcomer who is about to die without his help. The blonde man turns head to the team and asks the priestess if she can help heal the traveler, while the protagonist himself is visibly surprised that a priestess capable of healing has penetrated among them. But even taking into account the terrible state of the hero, who has only 2 life points out of 100 remaining, the hero priestess with a straight guy responds negatively won't help BJ, and the duende's victim too was surprised. But this doesn't embarrass the squadron leader too much, and he resorts to another Pat's Run team member to borrow a restoration potion from me, even if it is for occasions specials where the priestess's magic cannot help for the potion to work. The main character had to wish it on the very leg that was in the trap, and when touching the wound the potion began to emit something like steam. Although Bjorn's health began to recover quickly, the sensation did not. It was one of the best, to say the least, and that's why the barbarian screamed in agony. Unable to deal with so much acute pain, soon the pain passed, and with it all the poison that poisoned the guy because of the same trap evaporated. The leg was ready to be used again, so the guy started to get up little by little, still trying to calm down after the feeling of such imminent death, not because of the poison, but because of the sensations that the potion gave, taking advantage of the quid pro rule that the blonde tried to buy information from the main character about how he, a seemingly newbie, entered the dark zone before they was not surprised by this turn of events, and was even a little happy, since the altruistic help would be even more suspected of helping her with the profit. But still he replied that he knew nothing and was there from the beginning. As it turned out, this is popularly called a spatial instability, due to which only once every few hundred years you can immediately enter the dark zone. Bjorn was surprised because they were so skilled that they could even take a wizard and a priestess to the team. But in the first journey, Bjorn found something they had never found anyway. Their company did its job and ran to leave, and the blonde thanked Barbarian for such a story interesting, and said he didn't need to worry about the price of the potion, and that he was free, although he should. Being happy to have survived the situation left some wounds in Bjorn's soul, because he didn't like how they simply took pity on him, even spent his time in the labyrinth, which was as valuable as gold. While the barbarian recovered, a group of adventurers decided to follow the guy's bloody trail and see where it would lead. And during the trip they talked about how lucky the newcomer was because he met them. Like and follow the channel to have continuation of the video is about as very good, and you will like it a lot.